In the scorching heat of August of 2020 in the rugged desert of Arizona, two adventurous brothers went on a challenging hiking trip. One brother decided that it was just too much for him, so he turned around, opting for the safety of the car that they had left earlier that morning. The other brother, Jacob, was determined to finish the hike. There was a beautiful waterfall at the end, and he wanted to see that. Little did he know that that solo journey would soon become a terrifying nightmare. This is the story of Jacob Velarde. So in a poll I put out recently on my community tab, you guys said that you wanted stories about hiking. So here you go. I haven't really done a regular old hiking story, so here's the first one. I think it was a popular one in the poll because it appeals to so many people. It's fairly easy and inexpensive. You don't need expensive gear, and some people don't even have to go that far to get to a local hiking trail. So it's pretty easy to do for most people. But as we all know, things can go very wrong with any type of an adventure. And that day, in August of 2020, things did not go right for Jacob. So Jacob Velarde was a 24-year-old who grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. He developed this deep-rooted love for the outdoors. He'd been hiking his whole life, and he was just super into camping, fishing, and anything to do with the outdoors. He was in the Boy Scouts for years. He'd hiked all over the U.S., including Alaska. His lifelong love of these activities helped shape his adventurous spirit. The hike we're talking about today is called Indian Maiden Falls, and that's in Arizona, where Jacob lived. It's known for its picturesque but rocky terrain, and it's described as a popular trail for backpacking, camping, and hiking, but it's also a challenging route. It's described as an 11-kilometer or 7-mile trail that's technical, includes several river crossings, and a fair amount of rock scrambling. But the payoff is absolutely incredible. There's amazing views along the way, there's some rivers to wade through, and at the end, there's a gorgeous waterfall awaiting those who make it to the end. Hikers are told that they should start very early in the morning or camp overnight, just because you don't want to get stuck out there unprepared after dark since it's such a long hike in. The hike has some absolutely fantastic reviews online. Check them out. And since this is in the Arizona desert, it can be scorching in the day, but then get pretty cool at night. There's a 600 meter or 2,000 foot decrease in elevation going in, and that's what you have to climb back up on your way out when you're probably tired and exhausted after a couple days of hiking this trail. And there's really no obvious trails to the waterfall, so you can see why the hike is called challenging. On August 4th, 2020, Jacob and his brother planned to hike this trail together. They were going to camp overnight at the falls and then head their way back in the morning. So they're going to kind of have a nice leisurely pace to this hike. And Jacob wasn't unfamiliar with the trail. He'd been studying it for a long time. He'd researched, he'd planned the hike for weeks, and he knew that it wouldn't be easy. And he knew from his research that that descent into the canyon was notoriously challenging. So Jacob and his brother drove out that chilly morning and got to the trailhead just as the sun was coming up. Jacob recalls it was just one of his most beautiful, perfect days ever. One of the best that he's ever hiked. The air was cool, but they knew that that wouldn't last. The desert was going to start heating up anytime. So they started out hiking and they were having a pretty good time for about a mile, and then the trail became really steep and it was all just gravel. Just getting traction and not sliding was difficult. Jacob's brother started slipping, and after repeatedly slipping as he tried walking on this gravelly steep slope, he quickly realized that the hike just wasn't for him. So he decided to turn back. But Jacob wanted to keep hiking. He'd been researching this for weeks. He was really looking forward to it. So he just tossed his car keys to his brother and said that he was going to meet him in the morning, that he was going to keep going because he wanted to see that waterfall at the end, and he would meet Jacob the next morning at the car. He felt it was a pretty safe decision, this solo hiking, because his brother knew exactly where he was. He knew when he was supposed to be back, and even their parents had their location of the hike, so a lot of people knew where he was. So he felt okay forging on alone. So his brother turned around and went back to hike back to the car and hang out and stay for the rest of the day and the evening. Jacob said, "See you later, I'll see you in the morning." Jacob continued to hike, and soon after, the river came into view below him, and the trail became less obvious what trail he was on. So he kept walking and walking and looking all over for this way down this hill. And he couldn't find anything, so he just kept walking and walking till he saw somewhat of a section that looked doable. It was this brush-covered slope, and it looked like he might be able to make his way down there. It was a little bit barren compared to the rest of the area, so it kind of looked like a natural way down for him. So he decided to go down the slope right there. But as soon as he started down there, he realized that the ground was much too loose. It was way looser than he thought it would be, or than it looked. He immediately abandoned that plan and started climbing back up because he thought this is not the way down. He was up pretty high and he thought he didn't want to lose his footing there. So he looked up and saw this ledge that he was going to hop back up onto and go from there. He had 2 packs on him. One was in the front and one was at the back. So he took off the front pack and threw it onto the ledge above. And then he had his trekking poles. He took those up and he put those on the ledge as well. And then just as he started to push himself up with his feet, all of a sudden the ground totally fell out beneath him. In a split second, he was tumbling down the rocky, gravelly cliff. As he started falling, his face hit the ground first, and then he just kept tumbling down. It kind of stunned him a little bit, and he just kept tumbling and falling. There was red sandstone and dirt flying all around him. And then he picked up speed. And the only thing that went through his head right then was that he thought he was going to die. It all happened so fast and so violently, he couldn't grab anything to slow him down because he was moving too fast, and he couldn't even protect his head as he flew downhill so fast that he didn't even have time to think. He bounced off the ground a few times, and then he rolled and rolled and rolled, and then all of a sudden he was at the bottom of the cliff. He landed by slamming flat on his back and hitting his head on a rock, and the fall was finally over. For a few minutes, he just laid there in shock and pain and utter confusion. But to his surprise, he was still alive. Everything hurt, but he was alive. One of his eyes was totally swollen shut, and what he could see out of his other eye, everything was spinning. He knew he had a concussion. His left wrist was painful, and he thought he broke it. He could barely move his hand. His right ankle was just terrible, as he put it. He said he couldn't use it at all, and he was just in agonizing pain. And on top of all that, his face was so swollen that he was having difficulty breathing. He couldn't breathe through his nose at all. So there was a lot going on for poor Jacob. And as an instinct, as you do when you're lying on the ground after a fall, he tried to get up right away, but all of a sudden this dizziness hit him and everything started spinning and he just couldn't even stay upright, so he just gently sat back down. Jacob didn't know it, but at the time he fell a staggering 21 meters or 70 feet down the hill. He said falling was the easy part. After that, he had to stay down there and just figure out how to get out of there. He knew that he would be in it for the long run and that it was going to be painful. And then he remembered that he had his phone. It was in his pocket and it was actually in pristine condition. There wasn't a scratch on it, but he had no cell service. He was just too deep and far in the canyon. But he tried dialing 911 anyways, just hoping that the signal might pick up and go through. He knew that he was in a bad spot and needed help quickly. But he was in this canyon in the middle of nowhere, and he wasn't sure that that call would go through. And he knew that there wasn't very many people on the trail. There was a sign-in booklet at the very beginning of the trail, and he had noticed that there was only a few people who had signed it, and it was from days earlier. So it's not like there was people just running up and down this trail all day. If there was any luck to this horrendous fall at all, it was that Jacob landed pretty close to some water. So he ended up crawling over to the water to clean his face off and further checked out the rest of his body. He had gashes all up and down his shoulders and cuts up and down his arms. His shins and knees were scratched and just covered in blood. He was a total mess. He was hoping that the cold water would help with the swelling and pain, though, as the day got hotter and hotter. He still had one pack with him, but that other pack that he placed up on that ledge was still sitting up on that ledge, perfectly placed where he put it, but it also had his food and water. But in the other pack that he had with him, he had a water filter, so he was able to drink that water by just filtering it out. The fall happened at about 8 a.m. that morning, which meant that his brother wasn't going to be expecting him for another 29 more long hours. And then the temperature just started soaring. It hit 40 degrees Celsius or 105 Fahrenheit, just brutally hot temperatures. So he was getting hot as the day heated up and just found himself hiding from the sun under this tiny branch on this tree that he was near. He pulled out his hiking pillow, a towel, and a brand new hiking tent that they had just bought, but he knew that there would be no way to set it up in his conditions, so he managed to hang it in the branch just above him to give him just a little bit more shade. And then for the rest of the day, he just lay there in excruciating pain. And then evening came, and then things got worse as temperatures dropped so low that Jacob was just freezing. He said he was awake every 10 minutes and he just kept rolling over because he was in so much pain and couldn't get comfortable. And on top of that, on top of all of this stuff that's going on with poor Jacob, he had bugs crawling all over him all night and ants were biting him. And he said it was just absolute torture. He shivered all night long, just unable to sleep. But the next day finally came, and he thought about his brother sitting comfortably in that warm car and just hoped that he was going to call for help soon. He was actually thinking about hiking out and kind of had made a makeshift crutch to hobble along on, but he didn't hobble very far because he couldn't really walk on his right ankle at all, and he had so much dizziness and headaches that he knew he wouldn't be able to make it out far. There was just too much climbing, and it was way too far and way too steep. And that's when he took out his phone and started taking some selfies and realized the state of his face. He was absolutely shocked at how many injuries he had on his face. He then drafted some text messages to his family to be sent when he got a signal saying that, hey, I've been in an accident and it's pretty bad. You probably won't see me for another few hours. I'm seriously injured, but I think I'll live. He wanted his family to know right away what happened. And although he was pretty positive, he was still really scared. He was stuck in this canyon, injured, could barely move or see, and he was just kind of at the mercy of the elements. He was just praying and hoping that somebody would come by or that his brother would come find him. He said he couldn't even think of it going sideways and him dying, that just wasn't an option. But one thing that he did have that was really brilliant was an emergency whistle. So he took that out of his pack and blew it as loud as he could every 5 to 10 minutes. And then about 24 hours after his fall, he started hearing some rocks moving off to his right. He thought that only meant one thing, that was probably people hiking. So he got pretty excited and he looked over, and lo and behold, he saw this family of hikers making their way down the canyon. He immediately started yelling for help. He was just so relieved to see people, and they spotted him immediately and they ran over and were shocked at the sight of him because he was just covered in blood, and they knew that he needed help and they needed to get help fast for him. So the father pinned the location with GPS on his phone and then just ran to get service so he could call 911. The mother and the daughter sat there with Jacob. They set their packs down so he could lean against him and get a bit more comfortable. And then they just sat with him, trying to keep him comfortable and conscious and talking to him to kind of distract him from the horrible situation that he was in. The father actually almost had to run all the way back to the beginning of the trail to get service, but he did get there and was able to give search and rescue the exact coordinates of Jacob's location. And the one thing that Jacob's brother told him when he saw him was, "I told you it was dangerous." Which is something I bet Jacob probably didn't want to hear, or something that he knew by that time. But after 2 helicopter rides and a bumpy ATV ride, he made it to the hospital. He was treated for fractures to his skull, but other than that, he didn't have any other broken bones. His arm and his leg were fine. Other than that, his injuries were minor. Jacob took a while recovering mentally and physically and said that he hopes that his story serves as a cautionary tale for people who are considering hiking alone like he did. He said he was being a little bit reckless and that he knows he's lucky to have lived. He said, "I just want to make sure everyone knows the risks and that it's better just playing it safe on a hike. I probably won't be doing any solo hikes soon, but eventually I will be doing it again. I'll just be more prepared and safe next time." So that's a story of Jacob Velarde. What a crazy story, and glad that he made it out alive. And he learned some lessons and wants people to learn from his mistakes. What do you think of his story? Do you think he should have kept going? Would you have kept going if you were in his spot? There's lots of people that go solo hiking on that trail from what I saw, so it's not uncommon. But what do you think? Would you do it on your own? And if you have any other crazy hiking stories that you've had, let us know in the comments below.